called back this week by a group called the Nittany Valley Society, which is an environmental group, but a different kind of environmental group, because there are lots of environmental groups that are concerned with the physical environment and trying to preserve a safe and wonderful physical environment for us. And their Nittany Valley Society was created to preserve the cultural environment, to keep alive the spirit and the traditions and the customs, the legends and the history of Penn State, Center County, State College, the Nittany Valley, and they're bringing out a series of books. The next two books, I'm going to talk about the first two in a minute, but the next two books are going to be bringing out a history of the Penn State, well, the next book is a book of the legends of the Nittany Valley, the Indian legends. That there were a lot of Indian legends collected of the area within 50 miles of the Nittany Valley. And so they put a collection of 18 of those together so that you can read where did the legend of Princess Nittany, a Nittany mountain come from, Indian summer, King Wydog, and why you all want to return to this area all the time. There's some wonderful Indian legends that were collected by Henry W. Shoemaker around the turn of the century, published in the Altoona newspapers and then in books. And he became the first official state folklorist of any state in the Union here in Pennsylvania. So he was honored by Governor Pinchot and successors as a great collector of the folklore of the Indians of this area, as well as the early settlers. They also bring out a book after that, a history of the Pennsylvania State College, written in the 1930s and never published. So they have sat down to take the onion skin paper and copy it, and then type out 450 pages, get it into digital form so they get it published through Amazon. Now the first two books they brought out, the first one, and that's the one I'm going to talk about tonight, is Penn State a Real University, is the name of it. And this is a collection of 8 articles that were published a quarter of a century ago in 1988-89 in 8 different issues, monthly issues, of State College magazine. So every issue for 8, well, it's about 10 months because they skipped 1 or 2, they published these 8 articles on is Penn State a real university. Now why were these written and what mattered about them was this. By the 1980s, student life and the student body were drastically changing, and the whole relationship to the university. As a result of the riots of the 1960s, all of the power of the university was placed in the president of the university. And what this did was destroy the previous arrangement of power within the university, because prior to that we had something called tripartite governance. We had 3 different areas of governance. There was student life, which was run by the students. And the students were an important part of the university, and there was the faculty that cared about the courses and the curriculum, and then the administration was to, do the accounting and raise the money, and so each one had a function. But student life was organized by the students. And indeed, student discipline was handled by the students, not by the administration. You didn't go to before Old Main when it did an infraction, because students created a role. In fact, the first role of student government, the first purpose of it, was to define conduct becoming a Penn State student. That was done by students trying to organize themselves because they felt they were part of something, and they wanted to have the institutions to make that effective. Now, how did that grow up, and why did I write these essays? Well, by the 1980s, that was all being lost, all disappearing. All power was in the administration. The hub was run by administrators, not by students. This is a student union building. The students built it. The students paid for it. We didn't get a penny of university money to build this building. We didn't get a penny of state money. It was entirely raised by students. It was your building, but now it's run by administrators. Okay? Well, that's just one example. And I want to go back and say, where did this come from? Well, but in the 1980s, there were 1 or 2 things that were happening. John Oswald was president from 1970 to about 81 or 82. And he used to talk about students. Well, students are just customers. who come to the university to take their courses off the shelf and pay at the registrar. Okay? And John Oswald, when students were talking about their rights and they had a place in student governance, Bryce Jordan, the next president, said, students have no more rights at Penn State than customers of General Motors have at General Motors. Okay, you were just customers. Okay, that was the change taking place in the relationship of students to the university. So let me take a few minutes to talk about what happened. When Penn State was founded, there were only 59 students, 69 students walked through the doors originally, and for the next 50 years there were only maybe 100, then 200. When it reached about 300, students decided to organize themselves around 1905, okay, and organize the student government. What had happened in the meantime? In those 50 years, they started a lot of traditions. The major one was called the two colleges. That the purpose of coming to college was on one college, in the courses you took from the faculty. That was one of the colleges, the academic side. And the other college was the experience that the students created here on campus. When the Morrill Land Grant Act was passed, Justin Morrill said it's an experiment in democracy. The idea, you've heard the phrase ivory-covered walls and ivory tower. Well, the whole point was students came to a campus that was separated from the rest of the world in order to create their own culture, their own government, their own relations, and learn how to do it. Okay? And so you did create a very special spirit at each place, and that was the real university. John Henry Newman once asked, suppose we have two institutions. One where you give courses in every science under the sun, and when they pass so many credits, you give them a degree. And another one where they have no courses and no professors and no instructors and classrooms and laboratories. He said, which of these could be a real university? He said, the first never could be a university. He said, I have seen the results of that kind of education, and the results of that are dull and boring and resourceless. He said, I've seen the results of the other kind of education where an assemblage of students is just brought together for a period of time and organize themselves. And he said, I have seen, he's referring really to Cambridge and Oxford at the beginning of the 19th century, because he'd actually seen it. And he said, I've seen that kind of education produce the greatest succession of statesmen and explorers and businessmen with acumen and poets and leaders the world has ever seen. He says, how can we explain this? Because he said the real university is the spirit of the place. And only the students can create the spirit. And let me give you just one example of what I mean. You know that Harvard and Yale, or Oxford and Cambridge, are among four of the greatest universities in the world. And yet, if you were in England and you introduced an Oxford man as a Cambridge man, he would never, ever forgive you. If you introduced a Harvard man as a Yale man, he would never forgive you. Why? They're both equally great universities, or all four of them are equally great universities. Why is it that they would be so insulted for a Harvard man to be called a Yale man, for a Yale man to be called a Harvard man? Because the spirit of those two universities is totally different, and they relate to the spirit of the place. That's the real university. You can get the same courses in physics at either institution, but it's the spirit that the students create. Now this at Penn State took the form of what we call the two colleges. Okay, there was the College of Academics, and we called it here the other College of Extracurricular Activities. Now, what did this mean? In the early days, we were teaching nothing but mechanic, arts, and agriculture. So the students looked around and said, what's missing? What does this place need? And the first thing they did was form the Washington Literary Society and the Crescent Literary Society. And what they needed, what they said, we need a liberal arts education too. And so they created it themselves. Wayland Dunaway, in his History of the Pennsylvania State College, says, it's impossible for students to imagine today the excitement on campus every Friday as the Friday night literary debate was coming around. Okay? So here, now we are in sports, but then it was different. And tomorrow it could be different than it is today. The point was there was spirit on this campus. They built those things up. They built up their own library, the student library, that rivaled the college library. okay, and did it all on their own. By the 1890s, the college caught up with them and formed a College of Liberal Arts, okay? But at that time, new needs came. In the 1870s, Penn State suffered a real challenge. You know, we had a lot of scandals and things, and it looked like the place was going to go down the tubes. Philadelphia newspapers said Penn State was the greatest fraud ever worked on the people of Pennsylvania. Okay, and what they did then was bring in a new president, George Atherton, who without doubt is the greatest person ever to set foot in this valley. I don't care if you're talking about Nobel Prize winners or astronauts or anything else. There's never been a man greater than George Atherton. And he believed in this place. Okay, and he said, we're going to get going. So he went back to the legislature, got us back on track there, and with Washington, on the land-grant universities. And then he said, we're going to make this place grow. But there was no town on the other side of College Avenue, and there was no money for dormitories, and there were no other buildings. And they were living in Old Main at the time. And that they would sleep in the rooms, and then at the night they'd fold up, in the morning they'd fold up their beds, and they were classrooms. Okay, so how was this college ever going to grow? So he said, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to turn the students loose. When Penn State was founded, the faculty immediately outlawed fraternities. So George Atherton went down and said, legalize fraternities. Went to the faculty senate. Remember, we had 3 parts government, and you had to get the agreement of the different parts. George Atherton couldn't just do it. He had to go to the faculty and say, would you do it? So anyway, they legalized fraternities. And what happened? The students built 50, well, close to 60. I think there were 57 when I was here, but they come and go. 60 built fraternities downtown, each housing about 50 students. By the 1920s, those 60 fraternities housed 80% of the student population of Penn State. Okay? And the students did that without 1 penny of state money, 1 penny of federal money, or 1 penny of college money. They did it completely on their own. And they did it because they could go and talk to the banks and say, you know, we'll have bake sales and everything else to raise money to buy an empty plot of land. And there was no town down there, so it was cheap. Okay, and then they go to the bank and say, give us the money to build those beautiful buildings. And the bank would say, are you a fraternity? Well, they knew that fraternity students then could form bonds among themselves and rituals and ceremonies and pass it down through initiations that they knew that that fraternity would still be there 20 years later to make the last payment on the mortgage. So they gladly loaned the money. In the 1920s, fraternities were considered to be the safest investment in the United States. Okay? And by the way, all of them lasted through the Depression, where a lot of big businesses and other things went bankrupt. Well, they not only built that, later they built the student union building. The trustees wouldn't let them do it, wouldn't agree to it. They did various things, and finally got the trustees said, okay, we'll get the architects, but you pay for it. So the students raised their own tuition. At that time, students controlled the fees that were added. The administration could only set the tuition. All fees were set by the student government. So they added a fee of $15 a semester and $20 the following year. And they did that in 1950, and this building wasn't open until 1955, which meant every person who voted for it in student government would not be here when the building was open. In other words, the freshmen entering them would pay for 4 years without ever having the advantage of this, but they made the sacrifice. Now, students created the Spring Arts Festival. How many of you have been to the Summer Arts Festival here at State College? Did you know that was started by students? That was started in the early 60s. It was the Spring Arts Festival and used to be held along the wall on College Avenue and up the Mall. And in 1966, the town took it over and said, let's expand it into the town. And now it's the Central Pennsylvania Festival of the Arts, completely created by students. They had so many other. We still have the Homecoming Parade, but we don't have the Phi Psi 500. We don't have the Spring Carnival. We don't have a lot of other things that we used to have that students created. So I'm just trying to say to you, the student life, student government at these universities has a tremendous history, and it has so many things that it did. And I wrote those up back in the 1980s because people still thought it was possible to salvage them. Well, that was 25 years ago. But we still keep hoping that some students will come along and say, let's do it again. Let's be the student body that made Penn State great and created all this loyalty that we still feel today. We can do we used to do for the Penn State student body what Joe Paterno did for the football team. Okay, build them into a team, let them go out and do great achievements. And student government and the student body can do that again. That's why I want you to read this, that's why it's published, and that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Representatives may now ask questions. Chair Boyd.
As a man who's obviously well versed in Penn State history and tradition, is there anything that you think us as a student government can help revitalize from our past that might not exist anymore, that you think would be beneficial to the university and our student body?
Well, I can think of really many different things you could do. I think one of the things that's very much missing is a sense of ceremony, is a sense of ritual, is a sense of honoring things. The greatest power that students have is the ability to give honor. You know, a faculty member that gets some honor from his other faculty members or from the head of the department, I mean, that doesn't mean anything unless there's money attached. But if the students in his classes honor him and give him a gift at the end of the course and say, thank you, you were great, or say things, you know, other places, that honor they value more than anything. Young people have the power to give honor, and you have stupendous power in that regard. So if you would choose to honor things, people would notice, people would look and say, wow, what young people honor, you know, you can't argue with it. You're not going to put the young people down. You know, I would say to you, you know, I've long wanted to go out and light up the mountain for Joe Paterno. Get 10,000 students to someday pass the word around. We're just going to walk over to Mount Nittany, climb the sides and fill the sides of that mountain, and at a given signal, turn our flashlights on, facing out as points of light, turn them back in the mountain, light up the mountain behind you. By the way, I've gone up to the mountain and experimented what this looks like. You know, that's just one thing you can do. I mean, there are so many things. Think of what you can honor. It doesn't cost money. You don't need permission. Create rituals, because young people love rituals. When this book of the legends comes out, have the seniors go to the freshmen in September when they arrive here and have some candles in the dormitories. I know you can't do that. So take the hell with the administrators and do something romantic and colorful. To candlelight, tell them the Indian legends of the valley. Because you know what's going to happen? They're going to go home, and the first thing their parents are going to say, well, what's it like at Penn State? And they're going to say, oh, the seniors came and read us the Indian legends of the area. You know, the legend of Mount Nittany. Well, at Thanksgiving dinner, they're going to be telling all the uncles and aunts, tell them what happened at Penn State. They came and read us the legends. I mean, it will spread. It's something they can talk about, something that sounds beautiful, something that sounds lovely. I mean, so I've given you two examples. I'm going to give you a third one, because this is really the most important. Every year, there is an audience of 100,000 people that assembles here 5 or 6 or 7 times a year at Beaver Stadium. And what do most of the students do? They go up and drink beer out of the trunk of their car. Okay? Now, what would it take to get an audience of 100,000 people? How much money does a rock group spend to advertise a concert to get 100,000 people there? $1 million? A couple of million? You have it for free. Organize your houses. Organize your fraternities and your sororities. Go up there with barbershop quartets. You know, people dressed as a purple dinosaur or whatever. You know, a purple dragon or whatever. You know, and go up as clowns, as troubadours, as bands, as entertainment. Entertain those alumni. Make that just about the best experience, seeing the students put on the shows for the alumni. That would make our tailgating the most enviable in the world. And all you have to do is organize yourselves to go up and entertain the alumni. Put on a good show. Shakespeare says all the world is but a stage and we are but actors. Well, then put on a good show. Do that in ceremony, custom, tradition, and those kind of things.
Representative Warren.
Excellent. Dr. Novak, first off, thank you so much for coming in. Really, thank you for serving our country in the armed forces. Thank you. Yeah, I'm. Ooh, thank you. It's not on. There we go. There we go. I'm just gonna talk. Just talk. That's cool. Anyway, you can hear me. So, regardless. So, there we go. I am part of the Penn State Glee Club, one of the oldest organization on campus. And we actually do go do that, seeing the tailgates, and it is a load of fun. I totally recommend anyone to do it. My real question, though, for you is, what do you suggest, since you've been a part of the Penn State tradition for so long, what do you suggest that student government and the students do to get back some of that old power that we used to have?
Well, understand, the last thing you want is power. You don't want power. If they talk about giving you power, give it back. Okay? What you want is to make yourselves attractive. Make people want to do things for you. Make the administration feel, our students are making such a beautiful thing of the tailgates. You know, we will do more of it. You know, we'll help you organize to do that. Make yourselves attractive. Don't be like the boomer generation that tried to be offensive and ugly to everybody, okay? Tell the Zoomers to go to and be different, all right? Make yourself beautiful to the alumni, to the rest of the world. You know, if you would put on a vigil, you know, when you did the candlelight vigil on Friday, just imagine if instead of having a riot, you'd have put on a vigil for Joe Paterno on the Old Main Lawn, the whole world would have stood up and noticed and said, wow, this is different. But we did a riot instead. Glad you did something. But their student government, if it were truly leading this campus, would have organized them to do something beautiful, attractive, and say, the whole world say, I love those students up there. What can we do for them? Okay, so don't ask for power. Let people come to you. Make them want to know you. Make them want to see what you're doing. Make it beautiful.
Dr. Novak, I just wanted to thank you again for coming to our assembly meeting. Why don't you give him another round of applause? Thank you.